thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Cynthia, and today's video is a bit of a creating process. We are going to be repurposing a book that I've gutted, and I'm sure we all kind of have these sorts of books that we've used the covers, but now we're left with the pages and not always knowing what to do with them. This particular book is not a vintage book, so I knew I wasn't going to be using the pages in my journals or to send in Happy Mail or anything like that. So I've also gathered some printables with the months on them. I'll have everything listed down below as I always do. These ones are from Ruby and Pearlexo. And at first I thought perhaps I could make some sort of agenda for myself or like a creative planner, but I struggled to use planners. The only time I ever used them that it remotely worked for me was while I was in university, but just on a day-to-day basis I just never think to go into them and look at them. So my plan kind of evolved as I was creating, which is great. So here my first step is really to take a good look at this book, and you're going to want to do that as well if you're wanting to create something like this. It's important to check kind of how the pages are sewn into the book, if they're glued, how sturdy everything is. And you're also going to need a couple pieces of cardboard. I haven't selected very thick cardboard, but of course you really could. You could create a whole new spine and a cover for your journal. I'm just going to be reinforcing the first few pages with these pieces of cardboard that are quite sturdy but really not very thick. And of course I'll have to trim them, but first I want to remove some of the pages inside of the journal, of the book, just to make sure that I have some room to add into the book. And here you see me really taking a good look at that, and you can see it was like a Bridget Jones book. I had no interest in this, so I knew that it wasn't gonna, I mean, the only other thing I could think of would be to burn it, and that was not very useful for anyone. So I figured, why not try and do something different with it and create something with it. So I'm just going to start ripping some pages to allow myself to be able to create inside of the book as I wish. And I've never done this before, so I'm just really hoping that it doesn't really injure the sturdiness of the book. But as I was removing pages, I really didn't see any issues in the structure of the book. But that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be doing this. It might be a good idea to perhaps, like, ripping is better than cutting in this sense, and you might want to leave a little bit of each of the pages to allow the book to retain its sturdiness and a structure. Now that I'm happy with the amount of pages that I've removed, I'm ready to move on to the next step. I need to trim those pieces of cardboard and to make sure that I create a bit of a sturdier front and back to the journal. So I'm just gonna try my best to kind of figure out where to trim these. I do want them to be just slightly bigger than the pages themselves, and just to allow things to poke out, but to kind of protect the pages a little bit more. And I'm just going to be using some wet glue to adhere the cardboard onto the pages, and I'm going to glue a couple of the pages on each side just so that it's like it has a good thickness to it, and that these pages are really adhered onto that exterior cardboard. I really hope that you're all doing really well. I do want to thank all of you who offered so much support for my very first sale. It just meant so much to me, and truly I couldn't have asked for anything better. And although I was very nervous and anxious, it did go really well, and that wouldn't have been possible without all of your support. I have had a bit of a tough few days. Oh my goodness, I went to the store, and as I was walking home, unfortunately I slipped on the ice, so I sprained my right wrist, and thankfully it's not broken, but it isn't a very good sprain, so that's not great, considering my right hand is my dominant hand. So I've been a little bit slower at getting anything out for this week, unfortunately, but I'm finally recording this video so that I can share it with all of you. Here you can see I finally have my 2 pieces of cardboard to the size that I need them to be, and then I'm just going to be using some of that wet glue to adhere those onto the book itself. And I'm just using like a very basic craft glue. I probably put a little bit too much glue for some of this. It did wrinkle up a little bit and warp some of what I was collaging with afterwards, but it's really okay for me. This is obviously a personal project, and but just perhaps keep that in mind if you want to recreate that. I'm still really experimenting with glue that I use, and you know, sometimes less is really, it's a lot better. So here I'm just gonna press everything down and make sure that the pages are stuck onto that piece of cardboard really well, and I'm just using a little bone folder tool to do that. page is almost glued to the other page a little bit differently. I did choose to glue that one onto the page it was next to, and then I just did the same thing at the back of the book, just to create the same thickness and sturdiness on both sides. Obviously, I do plan on covering all of this, so I'm not too worried about what it looks like at the moment. But first, I'm just going to be covering the front of the journal or of the book. And I've just gathered a few elements that I really like. This book, what it turns out into is a journal in which I want to record every single journal that I create. So knowing that, I do want to use things that I love, that inspire me, and that really reflect a bit of like my personal taste. So I did want to include pieces that I did really love. That piece of wallpaper is my absolute favorite, and I knew that I was just going to be holding on to it, that I probably would never include it in a journal, and I would just stare at it. So I wanted to include it in something that was a little bit more, more permanent, but perhaps something I would use for longer than a journal, as I use my journals for about a season and then I run out of space in them. So I really wanted to use it in a space where I knew I would come back to it all the time. So I thought this was the perfect project for it. So I grabbed that, a piece of music paper, and then this really pretty printable from Dust to Roses. It is one of my favorite printable. I've used it many times before in various projects. It's like an embroidery pattern. And I'm just going to trim each of these elements before I glue them onto the cardboard. that I've done the front of the book, I'm going to be working on the back. I'm just going to be using the same elements that I've used on the front. Of course, I won't be using that same piece of wallpaper, but I am going to be replacing that element with just another printable that I really like. Just playing around with these elements before I glue them down. I tend to really prefer when things are not all straight, so that's why you saw me rip this piece of printable wallpaper, and then I'm just inking it up a little bit. This particular print was a little bit too cool tone for me, so I wanted to add some warmth to it with the distressing ink. And then I'm just going to be gluing everything down before I can add a piece of fabric to really kind of tie in everything together and cover that spine, since it's just sitting bare at the moment. Here you see the piece of fabric that I've selected. Green is my favorite color, so again, I wanted to use something that I knew I really loved, and it also kind of worked out with the more neutral tones and that wallpaper that I had selected. And I'm just going to be using some fabric tack to adhere that onto the book. I do find it easier to apply the glue on just one side first, then the spine, and then the back. Otherwise, especially with fabric tack, it just dries too quickly to be able to play around with your fabric and or remove if you need to. So it's just better to do it step by step. now that I'm done with the outside, I'm ready to move on to the inside. I wanted to kind of collage just some different printables that I really like, so I've just selected a few and you'll see me assembling them onto the inside of the cover, and I'm just using my bone folder to make sure that it's adhered really well and that it folds the same way that the book is folding. Nothing really that I've created here is perfect. It does like warp a little bit, and that's really not something that bothers me. So if it does bother you for your creations, simply use less glue and allow it to dry properly before moving on to each other steps. Here I'm just kind of going with it and not letting it time to fully dry before I move on to the inside, and all those little steps will make a difference in your final results. So I'm also adding this really pretty piece of velvet ribbon just in a crack there. I wanted to make sure that it was going to be really sturdy, since this is like the where the front cover is attached to the book itself. So it did add a little bit of bulk, but I really liked the way that it looked. And I am going to be just playing around with those two pieces of cardboard that I use as covers. I'm just going to be bending them the way and the shape that I want them to be bending, and I'm just not treating this book very carefully at all. It's not a delicate thing, so I want it to be sturdy, I guess, because I want it to last me a really long time. And here I'm just adding a piece of handmade paper and just a little trim at the bottom there. I thought this would serve as a good kind of title page to introduce what this book was going to be, but I don't think I knew at this point still what I was going to be doing with it. It came to me, I let it sit for a little while, and now I'm going to show you what came to me. So you see here what we've already done. When we open the book, I have a little bit of an introduction about the journals that I create being an extension of myself, and then I just have all the months where I can record which journal I've created and within the book. So I have a page for each journal that I create, and each month that comes, I'll be putting, you can see here January, and then for the books or journals that I started creating in February, there was the February that started. So it's really truly just a way to keep track of everything that I create, and to be able to have a space where I can go back to and look back on all the projects that I worked on, and all those special journals that I've created. I'm only writing down just little things, perhaps what inspired me, the name of the journal, and if it's a journal that I made for someone or that was sold. And that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for your support. I hope you found some inspiration within this video, and I will talk to you all in my next one. Bye now.